So most of you who've done business with us know we've been around since April of '97 when we launched the first cyber liability policy. We've written over 125 million in premiums and had something close to 40 million in incidents. We get a claim a week. We're building a future with a deep focus on cyber risk management, emerging technology risks, and coverages that relate to cyber risk, which include D&O, crime, and as well as loss prevention services. And we are always adding new products. We recently did our webinar on technology warranty insurance, which has been very popular. So yeah, even though we've been around since '97, most agents don't care about that. They want to know what we've done for them lately, and these webinars are part of that effort to bring you into our inner workings on how we handle different sorts of risks and build on almost 20 years of success. Our hope is that we can provide you the resources so that you can then be perceived as the expert on cyber risk management. Many of you know we also do an annual cyber boot camp. This year we have 4 C credits for Georgia agents, and I think we've also added Alabama this year. We're going to do a live hacking demonstration by the author of Hacking for Dummies. We have expert panelists from the U.S. and Lloyd's of London. And we're also doing an after party at Fido's Irish Pub here in Atlanta. We've had lots of very positive feedback about our boot camp in the past. And we know it's not only going to be very informative, but the food is great. There's going to be some funny things happening and some surprises for the attendees. And it's going to be October 6th, and it's $75, and you can email info@InsureTrust if you are interested. So Vince Joseph is with me today, and he is a very senior industry veteran. He's been in the business over 15 years. He's been mostly on the underwriting side, developing policy forms and modifying policies to tailor to insured's needs. And he handles most of our large accounts and our big limit placements. And he has experience beyond cyber. He's done tech and professional and management liability. He's going to be talking about the healthcare vertical today.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me okay. If for any reason the audio is too low, please let me know. We'll certainly work on fixing that. So, what is today's webinar about? Well, healthcare companies have unique coverage needs, right? So, because they have unique exposures, I want to talk a little bit about some unique selling points commensurate with their exposure and the type of policies that are available specifically for healthcare companies. We'll also talk a bit about 2 pretty large recent HIPAA claims. We find that when we're talking to the end user policyholder, there's so much different coverage to get into. You get pretty deep in the weeds pretty quick. And sometimes it's better just to tell a story about some of the more recent HIPAA claims, and sometimes it paints a better picture on how it actually could affect them. And we'll talk about how the cyber policies actually would respond or had responded to those large claims. And we'll talk a bit more about kind of how some cyber policies are starting to add more specific coverages specific to healthcare as that exposure changes. So I hate to bury the lead, so I like to start with the claim payout first. So we're going to talk a bit about St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. Now this is one of the more recent large claims, and $218,000 was paid out. So where did it start? Well, first in 2012, some patient files were blowing around a construction site about 2 to 3 miles from the actual medical center. Well, it turns out they were not only not shredded correctly, but somehow their vendor managed to lose a few boxes of them, and they were found by some nearby folks. Well, they were full of patient records. Well, that's strike one. Now let's fast forward to 2013. Well, they also had an issue where the OCR, and we'll talk a bit more about the Office for Civil Rights in a bit, well, they received a note by the way, from an employee of St. Elizabeth Medical Center, which is a shame that one of their own people dropped a dime on them. But they were using a Google Drive or Dropbox type application to exchange records from one location to another. When you think about it, stuff like this actually begins with a good intention. I mean, if you think about a small medical practice or a small surgery center that might have 2 to 3 locations that doesn't have a very sophisticated IT group, and I think this probably represents a good amount of our potential policyholders. Well, without that IT group or without a better understanding of HIPAA compliance, yeah, sure, it sounds like a good idea, and it's free to use something like a Dropbox or a Google Drive to be able to share patient charts from one location to the other. Well, it's a HIPAA violation, and in this case, one of their own employees decided to inform the OCR about it. Well, that was strike 2. Well, here's strike 3. 2014, they lost a laptop of patient records, about 600 of them that were on a USB drive. Well, there was strike 3. Now, the one thing I want to mention again is these things aren't egregious and they're not wanton. They really, again, have good intentions. In this case, it was either one of the nurses or one of the administrative folks were bringing charts home to work on them on their personal time because they were backed up. And this isn't your typical hack or cyber breach. We're talking about just day-to-day business in a facility, and healthcare is squeezed enough as it is from an infrastructure standpoint that, and medical records are on paper, they're on file, they're on USB file. You can't possibly control them. They try best they can, but these types of things happen. Now, in this case, $218,000 were paid out ultimately. And we'll talk a little bit more about why. And again, I mean, this slide shows as well, a lot of it is good intention and ultimately a lack of knowledge. And we'll get into the why a little later on. Claim number 2, Cancer Care Group. This is another one in the past couple months. $750 paid to the OCR, not including dissent. So we can only assume was probably closer to $1 million. So what happened? Well, Cancer Care Group, for the record, is it's a facility in Indiana. I think it's about 13 or 14 radiation oncology private physicians and their practice group. Well, some backup media was stolen from a car. In this case, about 55,000 patient records. Now, when I say backup media, this was actually one of their IT folks was taking one of their backup drives from the facility itself and presumably to do something IT related with them, I would assume. Again, these things happen. You have to get these drives from one place to another, right? So why $750,000, right? I mean, that's a lot of money for, I mean, really, it's what could have been a general good-natured accident. Well, it comes down to, when the OCR looked at this, what they found was widespread non-compliance with HIPAA, okay? Really, it's the lack thereof of any policies and procedures in place. Okay? And I think, again, this is a lot of our small to mid-sized healthcare policyholders. In this case, Cancer Care Center had not conducted any kind of risk analysis in years. And in addition, they had no policy regarding the removal of hardware. Now, that's the important fact there. This has nothing, it has less to do with removing the hardware and more to do with the fact that there was no policy around it. In fact, it's one of these weird situations where having a policy is more important than enforcing it. Okay? Now, what does that remind you of? Well, from a legal duty of care standpoint, it's a lot like EPLI. You look at a McDonald's, okay? You can probably never stop the 17-year-old manager of a fast food restaurant from harassing the 16-year-old employee at the fry cook line, okay? But how do you get out of a large liability claim from an EPLI standpoint? Well, you put a poster up on the wall that says don't harass people. You have a mandatory training twice a year, and you make them sign a handbook. And having that policy is generally enough to mitigate that liability. Well, the same goes for healthcare from a HIPAA standpoint, okay? So let's talk about what those policies and procedures are a bit, and kind of how they apply to your cyber policy. Well, one of the things, I don't think we talk about enough or even don't look at enough on a lot of our cyber quotes are a lot of the value-added services that our carriers are providing now, because they're all looking for an edge. And almost all of them now are providing some sort of value added. So what's the value added? Well, access to pre-breach preparation, HIPAA documents, the actual templates for creating some of the handbooks around these things within your organization. And this is outside of healthcare as well, but specifically to healthcare, consulting related to what they need to do internally for HIPAA. Now, they're not going to pay for it, but you get access to the templates and documents that mitigate enough of that risk and kind of help you out from that legal, or help your policyholder out from that legal duty of care standpoint. Also, when we talk about this stuff, it's very valuable for that small to mid-sized healthcare company, because generally they don't have the money or infrastructure or the knowledge to even implement this from the get-go. And this is free. This comes with most cyber policies. And it's a huge selling point as well, because ultimately it's what mitigates the claim. They don't want to claim, they don't want to pay for it. That's why they're buying the coverage in the first place, right? So let's talk a little bit about the OCR. I've mentioned them a few times. Well, the Office of Civil Rights, in cahoots with the Health and Human Services, has levied to date about $26.5 million, that's billion with an M, against healthcare organizations, okay? So presumably, right, this money just gets redistributed to all the individuals that had their privacy and patient records stolen. No, well, I'm going to not hop on a soapbox, but the OCR keeps this revenue. That they are a nonprofit with all of our good intentions in mind, and this is their revenue generator. And the tough part about organizations that can fine and penalize your policyholders is that they can be completely arbitrary about it, okay? And frankly, they can make an example out of your client if they want to. You have a lot of young, go-getting political folks within the OCR that are looking to make their big case for their own political gain. And we've seen this across different industry verticals. But this is one where they can really make it, really pick a scapegoat of an organization and kind of go at them hard to kind of benefit their own careers, unfortunately. So where does the coverage kick in, right? What are some of the advantages of having coverage besides dealing with that and besides paying the fines? Well, go back here a slide. Well, a lot of the firms that the carriers have access to have deep-rooted relationships with the OCR. I mean, I can think of one in particular. I mean, this woman's been doing it for years, and I think she's in touch with the OCR every day. But when you have those kind of relationships at your disposal from a duty to defend standpoint with the cyber policy, well, that's one of the few things that can actually get you out of that bucket where they might want to make an arbitrary example out of your policyholder and get these claims settled and done a lot quicker than if they tried to handle it themselves. And that's a big selling point for clients. So let's talk a little bit about the, I guess some of the things we're now seeing as the coverage evolves, specifically to healthcare. Well, some more cyber policies are providing contingent bodily injury, or they're making it available on healthcare risks. So again, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the type of example that might actually cause a bodily injury from a privacy breach or from a HIPAA breach. So one of the more common claims is once that your patient record gets out there, let's say you're a member of a hospital and your patient record and it's disseminated, and someone takes it and one of the bad guys have it, and they use it to get their own medical procedure done because they're uninsured. They pretend they're you, and they get that procedure under your insurance. Well, the next day or next week, when you go to have your own procedure done, and it might be a very timely procedure, your insurance may be denied. Okay, you could see how not getting that procedure done because the insurance isn't there because they think you just had a pre-existing or a recent surgery, you could see how that could cause a bodily injury. You could also see an example as well where, again, one of the bad guys has a patient record, gets a procedure done, and says, well, I'm not allergic to penicillin or I'm not allergic to iodine. Let's go ahead and get this done. Well, that changes a patient record. And when that patient goes back, the good guy with the medical record, well, now allergic to iodine or allergic to penicillin may have been deleted from their patient record. You can see how a bodily injury could occur. And corrective action plan costs. So Let's talk a little bit about a corrective action plan. Well, when you have a remediation agreement, or I'm sorry, a resolution agreement, with the OCR after your big HIPAA breach, it always says you're going to pay us this much money and also implement a corrective action plan. And that corrective action plan, ironically, is all of that stuff we talked about earlier from a pre-breach standpoint, putting policies in place, putting procedures in place, putting a poster up on the wall that says, hey, HIPAA's out there, please keep patient information private. The corrective action plan is all of that stuff with the lovely added benefit of red tape mandated by the OCR. Okay, so now they're going to say, we want all these things done. We're going to audit you. We may have surprise audits. You're going to give us a written report every 6 months. Now, these things cost money, and typically you have to pay an independent contractor to come do this for you. Okay, so, well, how is the policy responding? Well, for one, some of them are actually providing affirmative first-party costs to comply with a corrective action plan, and it's often supplemented. But this is it's a new coverage we're seeing, and it's also a very beneficial coverage because paying the fine is one thing, but having to pay another $50,000 as well to comply with the other half of the settlement, that's a pretty big coverage point. And if you have any questions about the markets, we can help you out with placing that coverage. Please reach out to us after the webinar. Now, I write this is negotiable because this is another great reason and a great selling point for why policyholders, again, need as far as HIPAA violations and dealing with the OCR is concerned, need a cyber policy. If you handle this on your own, okay, or if they handle this on their own with their own firm who doesn't really know how to deal with the OCR, they don't know what parts are negotiable. For instance, the time limits, minimizing the amount of surprise inspection, streamlining the reporting, okay, independent versus internal monitoring of their own policies and procedures. All of this stuff can be negotiated with a carrier-provided firm that kind of is used to dealing with the OCR. Let's take a little bit of a turn right now and talk a bit about some other available coverages that are out there and kind of what we've seen change a bit and what we can help you place. Well, there's a few carriers as well that, I'll rewind for a second. We've seen carriers that can provide full-blown medical coverage for allied healthcare or for miscellaneous medical or for even doctors groups. And they'll endorse a little bit of network security on there. I'll say, hey, you have cyber, go forth. And it's generally not, I call it cyber light, right? It's just a little bit of cyber coverage. And then they'd come to us and say, well, can you get us a more robust policy? And that's kind of something we're seeing again and again. Well, what we can help you with as well is placing a policy that gives the benefit of having a full allied healthcare policy, and then from a modular standpoint, adding a full cyber policy as well. And still, you'd have the standard 1-split-3 medical limits, but you also have the added benefit of each having both 2 individual AGs, as if you had 2 separate policies but under the same policy number, or actually sharing an AG, which can actually come with the added benefit of a reduced cost and premium. And again, any questions there, please reach out to us and we're happy to help. Just want to talk quickly about extended reporting periods and kind of how statute of limitations apply in this space as well. Okay? The average time, I think the last stat that I've heard between when a breach occurs and from when you realize the breach has occurred is about 250 days, about 3/4 of a year. Okay? In addition to that, the OCR is backed up, if you can believe it, if you can believe it, they're backed up about 3 years. So when you look at doctors groups, excuse me, a lot of times the physicians will essentially sell out the practice, or they'll sell the practice, or they'll shut down business and open up if they get acquired by a bigger medical facility group. They'll wind up buying a tail, and that average tail is 1 to 3 years. Well, the statute of limitations for them to bring those claims that they may not even know about is 6 years. We can also help you place policies as well from a standalone tail that would kick in from year 4 to year 6 to help satisfy the rest of that statute of limitations from an ERP standpoint. Okay, so again, now you've got a selling point for policyholders that are ERPing out. for another 3 years on top of that. And those can kick in at the end of those 3 years, or we can work out versions of that coverage where we can actually add it at the inception of the ERP, and it won't kick in for 3 years. Okay, any questions at all? Please reach out. Bear with us one sec from a slide standpoint here. Hold on, Stephen. We're going through the through your question here. I want to make sure we address it. All right. So Stephen says, is contingent bodily injury requested in all insured trust quotes for healthcare related entities? Well, it's a great question, and it really depends on the risk. Depending on, the issue is that the coverage that we haven't seen pop up until recently as well. So as we see more and more carriers providing this, it's a route we're going as well. And we can talk a bit more about that. I'm going to put Steve on.
That's a great question. Hopefully you can hear me. Usually what we do is have a conversation with the retail agent about, did you know it's possible to get bodily injury coverage, or would you prefer us to do to pursue a separate life sciences quote with the cyber? And so I think on almost every case where we think it makes sense to consider that, we'll bring it up. But one of the purposes of these webinars is to make a wider audience know about this, so you can also be on the lookout for it and learn this. The interesting thing is that Vince has been able to come up with a twist where you can often combine the cyber with the medical, or at least get the bodily injury type coverage added to the cyber, where in the past we've almost always had to use two separate policies. And another note is there's actually a great deal of appetite for life sciences outside of the traditional med-mal carriers. And one area where we see this coming up time and time again is medical websites. We do an extremely famous healthcare website by a famous celebrity type doctor, and that account's growing, leaps and bounds every year. And we do have full med-mal, full cyber on that. And we've seen, that kind of thing. We've seen websites that teach CPR. It's a wide variety of medical type sites that are going the non-traditional coverage route. All right, I think we've answered all the questions, and really appreciate your attendance today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can certainly email us. And thanks again for attending. We'll be having another webinar before too long. Thanks again. Bye-bye.